Welcome everybody back to Forza Horizon 5, and today we're taking a look at the 2021 BMW M4 Competition Coupé. Now let's get this out of the way. This is a car that does have elements on it that are an improvement over the first generation, as this is the second generation that has been in production since 2021, and it is largely based on the standard 4 series. So yeah, improvements include over the previous generation that it has more power, more torque, which means it's also quicker in terms of acceleration, and it's also more practical, and being only a year old, it's going to have bang up to date technology. So yeah, all positives, no doubt about that. And like I said, it is more practical. So yeah, you've got a really rather nice interior, you've got plenty of space in front and in the rear, everything there you'd expect on a car that is no doubt quite expensive, especially in this competition version. And yeah, the boot is pretty damn sizable as well for what is a coupe, as you can see, pretty sizable. But there are negatives on this car, and there's no getting away from it, and this is obviously purely an opinion, but I don't like the look of this car one bit. Those two kidney grills look absolutely awful. Look slightly better in black because they blend in with the paintwork, but every other colour just makes them look absolutely gopping, and yeah, I really don't like them. I don't see why BMW have gone for this. The previous M4 was a really rather nice looking car with its smaller grills and really rather nice headlights that went well together, but yeah, the grills on this just look absolutely shocking, and I really don't see the point in them whatsoever. It's not like the car needs more air or anything like that going into it, so it's just like, what's the point? And another disadvantage on this over the previous generation is the weight. It weighs 3,803 pounds, which is quite a sizable 414 pounds more than the previous generation. And yeah, that's purely because it's wider, longer and taller. It's 4.8 inches longer, it's 0.3 of an inch wider, and it's 0.4 of an inch taller. Yeah, the taller and wider ones are a little bit marginal, but it's noticeably a longer car, and that plays into the handling as well with the weight. It's not quite as nimble as the previous generation. It doesn't handle its weight quite as well, and yeah, it's not quite as well balanced, as this has 53% of its weight up front, as opposed to the previous generation, which had 52% of weight up front. And I know that's only a percent, but considering this is heavier anyway, even more weight is then up front as well. So yeah, it's a little bit of a disadvantage. But outside of the kidney grills, I think this car does look overall really rather decent. I kind of like the rear. It's got a nice quad exhaust as well. I like the little spoiler it's got going on, and yeah, the wheels look good, and the grill, the bumper outside of the grills looks pretty good as well. But yeah, those kidney grills do really dominate the rest of the car, and it just doesn't entice me to want to, drive this car, let alone ever actually own one, if I could ever afford one. And yeah, that is just massively off-putting, and I'll get to even another reason why once we start driving it. But yeah, power-wise, like I said, it is more powerful than the previous generation. It's got the same size engine, a 3-litre inline-6 twin turbocharged engine, but it now has 503 horsepower and 479 pounds-feet of torque. So yeah, that's 72 horsepower more than before, and 74 pounds-feet of torque more as well. Obviously, a lot of that power is going to be wasted on the extra weight, but it still means that it's quicker in terms of acceleration over the previous car. So yeah, let's get out onto the open road and see what this car can do. So here we are at the drag strip. So first we're going to see how quick it can go before we hit the speed camera, and then we'll go around the track. So yeah, obviously this is only rear wheel drive, so it's not got the best launch ever, but neither did the previous generation. But obviously it's got a lot more in the way of power to deal with getting off the line. So yeah, it's not the best launching vehicle in the world. Obviously, if that's something you are more bothered about, you can get the X-Drive version, which has all-wheel drive, but that means it's even heavier than this. So yeah, but let's see what it can do, and then we'll get it around the track. So yeah, it does take a little bit of patience to get it off the line, but you are rewarded once you do, because there's no doubt that this is a quick car, and yeah, no doubt that it is quicker in a straight line at least than the previous version. So yeah, 138 miles an hour there, which is pretty speedy, to be honest, especially again from a rear-wheel drive car that you know, doesn't have the largest of engines. But yeah, engine noise wise it's rather decent, but you will hear that more when we get out onto the track. But yeah, on the whole it's a decent car, but those looks are just the biggest off-putting thing ever, quite frankly. It's just really hard to get away from. Obviously you're not going to be looking at the front for most of the time, but I can't honestly say that I would want something like this on my driveway. Especially if it was pointing and looking at me when I was getting into it. So yeah, rivals, we're in top end A class, and yeah, these are the stats. So yeah, the speed is pretty good, but everything else is a little bit on the low side, as you can see. And if you look at it compared to the previous generation, as you can see, the previous generation had the same kind of speed, more handling. It's got 6.2 compared to the 6 on this new one. Acceleration is 5.3, but I'm disregarding that because this is actually faster in terms of the pure numbers. But yeah, the launch is slightly better because it's got less power. The brakes are better purely because it's got less in the way of weight. So yeah, not the best stats in the world. And as you can see, 53% front in terms of weight and 52% for the older version. So yeah, it's nowhere near as well balanced, and you can definitely feel the additional amount of weight as well. And because of that, the rather sizable increase in horsepower and torque isn't quite as noticeable as you would expect it to be, which we'll see when we talk about the acceleration figures. But let's first see what it sounds like, and then we'll talk about it some more. So yeah, it still sounds decent. It's not any worse or any better than the previous generation, but it still sounds decent enough. But yeah, the acceleration, 0 to 16, 3.676 seconds, 0 to 107.972 seconds, and it goes to a top speed of 195 miles an hour. Now, the top speed wise, it's only 1 mile an hour quicker than the previous generation, but yeah, the previous generation could manage 0 to 16 in 3.887 seconds, so yeah, just over 0.2 of a second slower than this. But the margin does increase with 0 to 100, as that's 9.964 seconds, so yeah, just over 2.5 seconds. Yeah, no, just over 1.5 seconds even quicker to 100 with this, which is expected given, you know, the extra power means initial acceleration isn't much of a difference despite that extra power, but as speeds increase, more power, more torque does mean that it's able to get to those higher speeds quicker. But yeah, overall, handling wise, it's not that much better at all, if any better than the previous generation. Sure, you can still have plenty of rear wheel drive fun with it, it will slide around happily and it's easy enough on the whole to control in that regard, but yeah, it doesn't feel as nimble as the previous generation. The brakes feel a little bit worse purely because of the extra weight it's got to deal with, which obviously means more momentum to slow down, and yeah, just doesn't feel quite as nimble because of the extra length as well. So yeah, bit of a disappointment really. And at the end of the day, a coupe is supposed to be two things. It's supposed to look good, well, three things. We'll give this a bit of a leeway. It's supposed to be three things. It's supposed to be good looking, it's supposed to be not overly practical because that's not the point, and yeah, it's supposed to be fun to drive. Now this is on the whole quite fun to drive, but it doesn't look good and it's trying to be too practical, which has the negative consequence of it weighing too much and it being too big. A coupe isn't supposed to be an everyday kind of car, it's not supposed to be a family car, and yet it seems like BMW want this to have a coupe body but have the practicality of a four-door saloon. So yeah, and that has the negative compromise of it being too heavy, being too long, and then being a little bit on the cumbersome side. So yeah, it's not just the looks, unfortunately, that I have a problem with this car. If it was just the looks, then I'd be mostly fine with it, but an ugly looking coupe means that you're having a lot of the negatives of a coupe. You know, 4 doors, less practicality, you know, less economy and all that lot, while also having an ugly car, and that's just pointless, quite frankly. So yeah, I'd have to say, if you're going to try out a rear-wheel drive coupe from BMW on this game, go for the previous generation M4. It's lighter, it's more nimble, it's slightly more fun to drive because of the lack of weight, and yeah, it's nowhere near as ugly as well to look at. So yeah, bit of a disappointment, but I am at least glad it's on the game. It has more variety to the game. It's one of the newer BMWs that we've had on this game as well, so all props to that. But at the end of the day, I'd either prefer the previous generation M4, or I'd prefer the M8 which we've had in this game, added previously. I think it was in the car pass. So yeah, try one of those if you're going to try a rear-wheel drive coupe from BMW, quite frankly, because yeah, this is a bit of a disappointment, and definitely one of their weaker, newer cars. But nonetheless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.